Welcome to Talking in Stations, a podcast about EVE Online. I'm your host, Matterall, and with me, Carneros.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Easter, happy Passover.
And Ashtarothi.
Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashtarothi, and happy Guristas Bunny Day.
That's right, it's Easter. But first, I want to tell you, this show is sponsored by Eve Mogul. Eve Mogul, as an organization whose mission it is to supply New Eden capsuleers with services to increase their wallets, they offer both in-game and out-of-game services such as rigged satios, high-sec moon mining, trade hubs, market and industry tools, loyalty point store, and a supportive, active community. Visit eve-mogul.com to learn how to join and how to get on their Discord.
And that sounded pro.
Yeah, so you can sponsor a show too. Talk to me, Matterall, on Discord or in-game, and figure out how you can do that. Okay, Eve Mogul, thanks very much for sponsoring us. This is the Easter show. It's going to be a little shorter than usual. And the topic we decided to go with in the spirit of Easter bunnies is Phelan the Rabbit, which is a crime syndicate, or I don't know, what would you call him?
I call them the Pirates. They are basically, they are a crime syndication, but they are loosely formed cell-like criminal organization that likes to do crazy antics.
Awesome. All right. Well, so of course, get into some news. There have been developments in the last week in EVE Online. So we'll talk about player news and some CCP news as well. But first, I want to say happy holiday to you guys.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's good to be here.
I don't know. What do you think we should do news?
Yeah, let's jump in.
All right. We'll talk about Northern Coalition, who has just moved or has deployed to Malpace. And that's in the heart of the drone regions.
They picked a really good spot. It has good jump range to a lot of systems. Pretty lucky in that regard. There aren't any systems like that in Fountain.
Yeah. Well, the way I understand it, after having a talk with Apollo 42, is it 6 or 8? 42 something asterisk. He's the leader of bots, basically militia, and they're called Order 66, which is kind of cool. It's a little allusion to Star Wars. And they defend the area. And so what's been happening there in the last year has been there's been a lot of changes in kind of the power structure there. First, of course, there was the Russians who kind of owned it, the Drone Region Federation. But after they collapsed, unfortunately, it left a vacuum, and the entities that were causing it to collapse took over. And that would be Skill U and some Laserhawks and their HK and Volta, those groups. And then after a while, those groups, well, HK, was destroyed by Initiative, at least their home was, they're actually still very active. I think people should understand HK is still around and active. But that left Skill U pretty much, because Volta moved into Skill U as the dominant power in the area. But there, Laserhawks is still roaming around. So you have Skill U, who's has got their rentership program going now. But you have groups like Unspoken and Laserhawks that are working together. And I know they say they're not working together, but they are. And they've called in the Imperium to help them kind of destroy the area. And they're working on the Spire, which is a little bit south. And their goal is to take out all of BOT, I believe, inside of the drone regions. Now, BOT, again, is owned by Northern Coalition. It's their one of their renter groups. So NC Dot has an interest in defending them, and NC in the north, PL, and I think Horde as well, are deploying. Actually, only NC is deploying officially, but they are coming to help. So basically, the militia couldn't hold off these, mercenaries that were trained really well. I'm talking about basically Laserhawks and Unspoken, is it? And so they've called in the troops, the actual army, Northern Coalition, to come in and pacify the area. And they were doing that because goons have been invited into the area either as a SIG or I don't know if it's a deployment officially, but they're in there kind of burning things down. So that's the backdrop of it.
So I've got a question about this, which is when these kinds of conflicts, or when the bigger conflicts occur, a lot of times there's some sort of economic change that has inspired it. A lot of like the good example would be like the technetium change, or the moon mining change. Really, forced people to make moves against one another that were pretty extreme. Now, I know that there are other nullsec changes right now, such as we've now had 2 or 3 waves of anomaly nerfs or changes, which will probably restructure which systems are valuable. Do you think that is fueling any of this, or do you think it's just solely political ramifications from old, grudges?
No and no. Okay, so
was that a gavel?
No. Okay. Let's go back to the
sound of me being shut down. That's all.
No. Let's go back to the initial premise of was there an economic trigger that caused this to start? And oddly enough, probably yes. And that was probably the transaction whereby Goonswarm purchased period basis from Red Alliance. That's my guess, because that triggered the development of a new rental empire. And I think the first time a group sets up a new rental empire, they worry a lot about, are we going to get anyone to rent the space? I think that's a natural worry. And I think Goonswarm, from what I could see, I don't get to see their internal conversations on their rental deliberations, and they had a lot of them. I think they were initially concerned with, where are we going to get our renters? And they said, let's get them from BOT. Let's go make the neighborhood Brothers of Tangra be unpleasant, and maybe people will somehow move all the way from the north to period basis in order to get greener pastures.
Oh, wow. So you think
is that an... Well, also, they wanted to deny some income, because NC Dot and some of the PanFam folks are famous for relying on rental income for years and years.
Yeah. Like over 10 years. I mean, Lady Scarlet's been essentially renting for about 14 years. So it's been going on a long time. And there's different ways to look at it. Is it extortion? Is it renting? Or what is this stuff? Maybe we can look into that a little deeper on some other podcasts. But what's happening here, to get more on the actual current day, is deployment for NC. They've landed in a good spot, which is in the center of Malpais, P3X-TN. And that's a good area to focus their force projection in an umbrella there. And that is, the reason for that is, if you look at the map, drone regions are kind of stacked on each other, with the exception of Spire, which is in the south, which is closer to, say, Test and Legacy and Goonswarm and those people, and further from the north. So the Spire is going to be harder to defend, and it's probably going to get either left behind, or that's where the fighting will intensify in order to keep it. There is one thing that's majorly at stake there, is a keep star in L7, and that is L7 TAC BLT. And that keep star is a forward operating base for that area. And it's going to be interesting to see if they, Northern Coalition, will defend that. I think they will. They already took down the iHub, which makes the keep star a lot. I believe it makes the keep star in the surrounding area a lot more vulnerable. So that's always what happens before a big takedown, is the iHub gets taken out to reduce the time it takes to destroy things in the area.
That's a bad sign when they take out your iHub.
Well, it shows intent for sure. But also, that's really what SOV has come down to. People won't take SOV. So you shouldn't look at the map and say, well, who owns what territories, because it's not really what's going on. You want to look at iHubs, because those are the keys to future destruction in the area. So when iHub goes down, that's intent that they're going to try to flip other stuff too. And that's definitely already happened. And I believe the keep star will probably come under attack next, so look out for that.
It goes back to the famous farms and fields metaphor that this new nullsec, or the nullsec changeover, kind of was focused towards, because basically, so you've got your strongholds, and then you've got areas that you harvest from, your fields. And the more you cultivate those fields, the more valuable they are. So somebody coming in, taking out all your iHubs is the equivalent of like the barbarians coming and burning all of your farms to starve out the castles before you siege them.
Yeah. So Carneros, you're saying the motivation for Goonswarm to get involved, because they were brought in by Unspoken and Laserhawks, was,
I'm not
or
saying
they were invited
in, but I don't know if they were invited in.
Yeah. Okay.
I watched that meta show. I don't know. I can't remember if they said that part.
Yeah. I may be over.
And it's not Goonswarm there. It's there. It's a couple SIGs.
Okay.
The problem with a SIG is it's like having a pet. You have to feed it. You can't just like have a SIG, pet it every now and then then ignore it the rest of the time. You have to take care of it. So you have to give it content somewhere. So you go out there and you look around the map and you go, Tahiti or whatever. Just kidding. You pick what some place to send your SIG so they can amuse themselves without wrecking and causing drama at home. You send them out somewhere, and they picked, oh, well, let's go harass renters. That'll be fun. Oh, wait, there are other people here also harassing renters. I don't know. At some point, they all met up and did something.
They tried. Go ahead, Ash, and then I'll go.
I was just going to say, the allegory between the Imperium and like true Rome continues to be almost amusing, because it's like, well, we have this murderous horde that we use to attack people, but right now we have nobody that we need to attack. But if we keep them here, they're just going to start ransacking our own place. So we need to find some small village for them to ransack to keep them occupied.
Actually, that's what I studied in college, classical history. And it was true. Like when the Romans came marching through your town, even if it was a friendly town, they're like, oh no, they're going to destroy the place, because they would dig these giant pits every time they stopped, and they'd eat up all the resources. And it was not good to have your own army passing through your town. But in this case, I think, if you think historically, the Goonswarm has needed to keep certain groups, you're right, active, as Carneros explained. And they did that in the northern campaigns in Pureblind that led to the breaking down of CO2, the removal of Horde took off and went off to Geminate instead. So it does damage, and it accumulates damage. It's too many people with essentially unlimited fuel because they're using doctrines that don't cost a lot of money. So they're able to do a lot of damage up north, and that led to 2018's basically a year of titanic fights because once something starts breaking, then everybody brings the big stuff to kind of take it down. But that started just like everything else has started this year. You also, so you had a deal that kind of stopped that northern progression from the Imperium. That moved over to, because there was some kind of a peace treaty signed there with Guardians of the Galaxies. We'll call them DeadCo from now on, that Sword Dragons group coalition. After they signed a peace treaty with the Imperium, Horde was, I guess, what's the word? Astonished and angry about it. And so Horde basically declared war on DeadCo. And so there was bad blood starting there. And interestingly, Test and the Imperium went into Horde space to try to disrupt it. And that was basically 2019. That's how it started in January. It didn't actually get very far. Either Horde was doing a good job defending itself, or NC was close enough to help with PL. I don't know what all the factors were there. They did lose the high sec offshoring market, so they did lose something, some income, but they also were able to keep pretty much Geminate going. So the next target is, and this is just the Imperium moving into and disrupting the renter areas of NC, and that would be Bot, and that's Malpays and Spire and those kinds of places, basically. So that's what we're seeing. It's a continuation of, we got to keep these guys fighting, but we might as well use them to an end, and that is to erode or degrade the financial capability of our enemies. And I think the added bonus here is that if you're opening up a general store, you want to burn down the other general store in town so that everybody has to use your general store. And so, yeah, to beat up and to make unstable and basically paralyze a renter area, making it miserable enough for the renters to go and looking for a better, greener pasture. I think that is very logical because period bases just became available to Imperium, and now they have a green pasture and they need people to come and populate it.
And all right. A little bit off this core topic, but related, is this week there was a reset, a mutual reset between the Dead Coalition and NC Dot. And maybe, I don't know if there were others involved, like the rest of PanFam in some way. But they're now no longer blue to each other. And that probably has ramifications for jump bridges and various other things. So those two are separating themselves a bit.
Well, I think what's different, they were already, I think, reset. NC wasn't reset with GOTG or sorry, Darkness. That's the lead alliance for Dead Coalition. Forget GOTG. I never liked that name anyway. Thought it was unimaginative. But yeah, so you have Dead Coalition's renters are now no longer safe from Northern Coalition's fighters, basically PvPers. So that's what's changed. And that means that they can come under scrutiny. So if NC wanted to make DeadCo's life miserable, they certainly could. And they did before. They took out Test from the north. They took out CO2 from the north. They didn't take out Sword Dragon. This is all back in 2018. But they could have, and they can now if they want to. I'm sorry, it's not that they can just impose that, but they can certainly make it miserable. And the reverse is true too. Sword Dragon's Darkness and DeadCo partners can make NC Dot miserable as well, because in between their space and in and around their space in the north are these second renter groups called RMT, Rate My Ticks, and those belong to NC Dot as well. Those are income streams. You need to protect those, and you protect them by making sure that their life isn't miserable by being made by somebody else. It's very interesting, but it's definitely economic warfare. It's a slow boil, and it can lead to huge, huge campaigns.
It's worth mentioning that when NC Dot deployed this week, they did not bring their whole supercap fleet out to Malpais. That's still back home in Tribute. So if they do experience predations in their backfield, they have the option of responding with supercaps. They don't have to pull people back from the deployment, for example.
I think
Is that accurate?
Yeah, and I think also if you see if NC were to move their supercap fleet, you would see a northern campaign from Imperium. They would move super capitals all the way back up, because as soon as the safety of that super umbrella, that's force projection from a certain area, once that moves, you're going to see the Imperium attack, because that's what happened with Pandemic Legion. When Pandemic Legion moved south from the north, Imperium immediately moved their supers up north because they were that much weaker. So yeah, so they can't move it. That is stationary if they want to protect that other renting empire, which is important. This is a deployment of subcapitals and a lot of people. And I know from being in Northern Coalition, it's taken very seriously. So this is a real thing as far as campaigns go.
One of the reason why I asked that question originally is because the Imperium, probably better than any other single organization in EVE Online, understands the economy of war, right? And so, and it's also true that regardless of anyone's status of peace or war, there are people that the Goons and the Imperium will consider their enemies regardless of whatever, right? So they, you know, they have their enemy list and they are going after them no matter what. And so this idea of suppressing the economy of a known enemy is something that the Imperium is incredibly interested in and is more than willing to dedicate the energy to it. So, you know, it's one of those things that, like you were saying, if they deploy their super capitals, then the Imperium will too, because they're just looking for those opportunities. They're playing the long game at this phase, or at least they feel they are.
Yeah. There's some other things too that are happening there that are kind of interesting, and I'm going to put out an interview that I did with Apollo, and you should check it out. And he describes some of the stuff that's going on. It's kind of interesting. He also beats back some of the rhetoric coming out of the boat, who I'm a fan of. The Big Red Boat has a way sometimes of letting his excitement get ahead of the facts, or I wouldn't say facts, but the interpretations of, or other interpretations of what's actually happening. So so Apollo kind of brings to light another way of looking at some of the stuff that Boat's been talking about. So I think the bottom line, though, is Spire's in trouble and getting beat up. We'll see if they actually take down the Keepstar there, and then it'll be on to Mel Pace. I think that's what the ultimate goal is, and I have a feeling that will be strongly defended. We shall see. I think it would be interesting to see, too, what happens at Laserhawks. They almost got killed, like really killed. They had a bunch of Nixes that got caught, but they were able to free themselves before a fleet was deployed to destroy those Nixes. That would have been like 9 Nixes, and that would have hurt a group like Laserhawks. It's not that big. They're just good at evading. And that happened a while ago. So we'll see if NC actually crushes Unspoken and Laserhawks. It'll be interesting to see how far that goes.
What game are we playing?
Or if the Imperium allows that to happen. Go ahead.
What game are we playing in which the discussion of the potential death of 9 Nixes has to be like justified of whether or not it would be hurtful to that organization's overall power? Like what has happened?
Yeah.
This is the wrong. It's 9 Nixes can be one guy these days. It's just not comparable to the game that it was.
You remember when Jester used to like count out the number of supers that died every week, and it was like 4 at a good week? Anyway, sorry, I digress.
Yeah, all right. So another thing that's going on is, wow, did we talk about the Brisk thing last week? I forgot.
Well, we've been talking about it almost nonstop for like.
And especially if you participate in our Discord in between shows during the week, at a lot of times of the clock, there's a conversation going on in our public channel, and often it has to do with Brisk and that situation.
It was like a solid 48-hour conversation that happened.
we'll get to Brisk in a minute. Let's talk about PIBC announcing they're moving to Tranquility server. So let me set that up
So
real
this
quick for
is,
people. Oh, go ahead.
I'll do it a little bit.
Yeah.
Pan Intergalactic Business Community. Pan Intergalactic Business Community. The original is famous on Serenity, the Chinese server. But as an homage or a reflection or inspired by that name, a different group, unrelated, has set up a PIBC on Tranquility too. They are not related to each other. So Pan Intergalactic Business Community is winning in Serenity and is basically on top, and there's no one close to them. And the Serenity server is apparently not as exciting lately as it has been in the past, and they're looking for additional challenges for their pilots, and they've picked Tranquility to go send alts over and create a foothold and build their name there. But they're going to call it a new name. They're going to call it Army of Mangoes. And it's a fun name. Mango is sort of a Chinese Eve slang term for an F1 pusher in a way. It's someone who just does what the FC says and just presses F1 on demand, and off we go. So they're going to come over. They don't yet know what they're going, who they're going, where they're going to go, or who they're going to ally with, or who they're going to fight. What do you hear?
I don't know. I kind of see it as vapor news. Like this may never result in a thing. So I haven't really paid close attention to it. I've heard that they're coming in on their own. Naturally, there are some groups that they are affiliated with in the Imperium, and that's a scary thought to think about a whole Chinese server coming over and joining the already big Imperium is a very scary thought for the rest of Eve. But I've heard they're coming over independent to see what their options are if they come over at all.
I see this as just a part of an ongoing kind of narrative of the intermingling of Singularity or of Serenity and Tranquility. I mean, we've sent people over there, quote unquote, in the form of like Rooks and Kings. I don't think this is necessarily the first Serenity group to move over, maybe the largest or the most vocal. But also, you got to think like a lot of CCP is starting to focus on more of that market with their free-to-play game and whatnot. So I know that there's been some talk about like merging those the two sides more. But I wonder if either A, this is like almost like a planned next stage, because CCP has encouraged these kinds of things in the past, maybe not directly, but in different ways. But also Serenity just came back with a different manager. So this could be a response to that. I have no idea, but I wonder if there's some sort of external pressure since there's so many different things going on in that avenue or field. Well,
there's an article quoting Hilmar saying that basically the Chinese market is going to be the biggest e-market in the future in the next 2 years, which is a pretty big prediction.
And he's
and
not the only one saying that.
Oh, is that right? And I think it has to do with the mobile game that or mobile companion, right?
Well, the mobile market is very big in the Asian markets, especially in China. So you're seeing, especially, so you remember those 2 or 3 games all last year that got announced by big companies that were all very much hated on by their community. So Eve, CCP announced their game, Blizzard announced their Diablo game, and I think there is another one that escapes me right now. But the key with all of those is that they're all partnership with with a Chinese company that is focused on a release for that market. So whereas in the US markets, mobile games very much have this strictly casual Candy Crush kind of atmosphere to it. In a lot of these other markets, these devices are effectively their gaming device, and therefore are used for much longer games and also much more extensive microtransaction-y games, which is one of those reasons why they get a bad rap.
Ooh, we have a Chinese player in chat. Welcome.
Please correct all of the things I just said.
Yeah. Just correct our ignorance, please. We eagerly await you on Tranquility.
I prefaced that by saying that I don't know anything in this field. This is total. Everything I said was speculation.
Well, no. We're being playing funny here. By the way, somebody, I think it was, I wish I could find the name, said, put all the Chinese that are coming in period basis. Problem solved. I thought that was brilliant.
Okay. On the practical political side, I think I talked about this in a different place, but the groups that have an external locus of organization are generally speaking the groups that do the best, right? So the Imperium has, Goons had something awful. Test had Reddit. Arguably Brave Newbies had Reddit. Whatever it is where your identity is outside of a specific group or person. I'm going to pick on him real quick just because it's almost a meme at this point, but a good example is Elo Knight, right? Like Elo Knight can form an organization, but if he wavers, the organization, or if, more importantly, if the organization does poorly at any point in time, and then he wavers, then it can basically redissolve really, really quickly. Whereas in a group like Goonswarm, when they take, and I say Goonswarm, not Imperium specifically, but because I'm talking about like back in the day, when they took a licking, instead of disbanding and losing faith in their leadership, that only solidifies their us versus them mentality if they have some sort of locus or arrangement outside of Eve itself. So, we've seen it in all of these kinds of organizations, and you've also seen it in kind of the Russian coalitions and in the fact that, generally speaking, they're decent enough at pulling together when they need to. These cultural identity groups are pretty good at remaining whole, tangible units in spite of great suffering losses. So it'll be interesting to see what this group does regardless of who they join. It'll be a group to watch
if they appear. We'll see. We've seen that before. We expected a lot of people to come in. We saw Fraternity kind of grow, but it wasn't as big as we thought. And one of the problems, as explained by Wind Spirits of Fraternity, is that if they come a little at a time, there's never a threshold where they feel like there's good gameplay for them as a group. So they kind of come in, look around, take off, and then the next guy comes in, looks around, and he takes off, and it goes on and on.
Right.
There is one thing different from previous waves of Chinese immigration, though, which is now some Chinese internet service providers don't block your access to the Tranquility server, or some of them will unlock more access for you for an additional monthly fee. So the barriers to entry have been reduced somewhat, at least if you live in a big city. That's the understanding I have. I haven't been back recently, though.
Well, yeah. Again, so their server has essentially been all fished out, right? Like they press their opponents so effectively, there's not much to do, which is always a problem. And they're about to go through a big change, and I think the server is going to reset. If I'm not mistaken, the Chinese server will be reset. Is that true? Does anyone know? Okay, if you don't know, then
I don't think so. But that is actually a really good point. So this organization, regardless of their quote unquote organizational ability, they are going to have to start from scratch, right? Not only with like how many resources they have, but their pilots are going to have to be, Rifter pilots for a little while, right?
Well, it's not a bad way to start. You can see where that ends.
I can see people like purchasing like up the skill injector market right now as an entire like group of people are ready to join in and try to inject their way into being competitive.
Yeah, the skill injector market, and I want to cover this on the chill streams that we do like during the week. If you look at it, the demand hasn't fallen off at all, and I think that's part of the reason Plex prices are so high. People coming in and buying up Plex or selling Plex to afford injectors, because the demand hasn't fallen off. You can see that it's just consistent, and the price for injectors has not gone down. It's just gone up and up and up and up and up. So something's happening. I have a hunch. I know what it is, but it's just a hunch. I'll tell you now that I said I had a hunch, is that basically with the nerfs coming to income generation, that people have spun up new alts and needed to get them into condition to make money. So they're spending a lot of money on skill injectors to, if their Rorqual is going to make 20% less, they're going to get 2 more Rorqual pilots. So that's what's happening. That's what I think was happening. And if you have a big migration from China, Chinese players, then you're going to have people who want to get up and running as fast as possible. That injector market can probably, I think it might be low. Who knows? We'll see. That's not investment advice. Take your investment advice from Eve Mogul. All right. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I wonder how much of the skill injector market really is people buying like a high amount of skill injectors in order to get one of those big things. And really, how many realistically are people buying like 2 or 3 skill injectors so that way they can get into a Gila and start doing, PvE stuff or something like that?
I think it's a bit of everything, but I don't know. And somebody points out here, Albion, doesn't take much to get into a Ferox, and that's true. But if all you can do is fly a Ferox, then I think you'll participate sometimes, but not all the time. So you probably want a diversification of skills to fly different things. Plus, you got to buy all those core skills, for fitting. And then you got to buy all the, essentially get yourself to T2 and all the modules and all that. It kind of adds up.
And so if you've chosen to add one more ship capability to one of your alts, and it's a Rorqual because of the recent nerf, that's a lot of skill injection. Takes a lot to, So some of them, my background is not from Arcage. It's a resort in Tahiti that I wish I was at this morning.
Yeah. And somebody's told me, and I'm not sure it's true, but it sounds really good, is that Rorquals are actually some people are extracting their Rorqual pilots and getting into different mining ships, which is exactly what CCP wanted to do. So if that's happening, it's really encouraging. It means they did the right thing.
People should be getting ready for the abyss.
And CCP intended that in 2 ways, not just to have fewer people in a Rorqual, but also they intended for the skill point trade to be a back and forth thing between players. That is part of their design for that system. They wanted players to go back and forth if they no longer liked something they'd traded before.
Well, especially since CCP effectively takes a cut 2 times out of that system, right?
Well, that's how I would design it if I were going to.
Well,
they're draining the game of experience points or skill points, which I guess can only be good. Okay, so let's move on if we can. There's a couple things. These are big topics, and I don't know if we can cover them. But Ashtrathi, this might appeal to you. What's been going on with the war deck changes? They're not all done, but 2 out of the 3 steps are. There's still one more big step to happen next month. Has there been any changes? Because I've seen some mergers of pirate merging or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know enough to give a report. I know that there's been a lot of growing pains among the communities that that used to rely on war deck systems. But I've started to hear the tale of basically war decks being used almost like they should be, as wars of territory or spite within HiSec now. The most recent change made it so that neutral logistics and neutral boosting is no longer a thing, and also got rid of some of the more heinous exploits that were causing attackers to get frustrated, in particular, and protecting structures. You were able to use various exploits in the war deck system to make sure that structures basically could not die. So they fixed that. And then next that's coming up is almost like the war room concept, where you have to designate a specific structure in space to be kind of the center of the war, and the enemy gets to know that location, and then if anything happens to that structure, if it ever leaves space, that war instantly ends. So that will provide an objective for the defenders, and I think that a lot of people are really waiting to see what happens when that gets locked in.
I was mistaken thinking that was already the system, that if they only had one, they haven't designated one, but if they only had one structure and you blew it up, I thought the war ended immediately.
That is correct, but the thing is that
we
right
went and
now,
blew it up and it didn't end immediately.
Oh, did it not?
No.
Oh, oops. I think it was supposed to. I mean, this is an interim time, so who knows how it's actually working. But
those changes come next month, don't they? Yeah, I think they come next month. They're announced, but they haven't actually hit yet.
Right. Anyway, so the big thing is, like, right now you have to have some sort of structure in space in order to declare one. Apparently losing that structure doesn't end it, but I thought it did. Either way, the big problem with that is there's no real good way of knowing where and how many structures your enemy has, right? So if somebody has some, like, 5 different wormholes with an Astrohus in it, your chances of being able to hunt them all down and take them out isn't very high. But in the event of this new system, they now have to basically tell you where their target is, and either they have to choose whether or not to declare all of their wars to the same target, thereby risk, having multiple enemies band up against you, or spread them out to multiple structures in the event that an organization wants to have multiple wars.
Right. And so Spoon Avenger there says it drops if you kill the last structure or their last structure.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's possible that you thought that you were destroying their last structure, but there's really no way of knowing. Even if you have a spy in their organization, due to the nature of the way that structures are reported, that you can have a structure that basically is almost impossible to find within the organization. Yeah. I know this for a fact because for like a month and a half after the war deck changes happened, our industrial corporation or alliance was war eligible when we were supposed to have transferred all of our structures to another organization to keep it so that it was war immune. But for a month and a half, we were war eligible because we literally could not figure out what structure it was that was still in space. Mm-hmm. So we had to start kicking out corporations until it finally went away and we were able to find out who the culprit was.
All right.
This is a bad system, by the way.
Yeah, I wanted to know if this has forced people who used to basically use the war deck system as a license to kill in HiSec, if it's affected them. And I think we've seen some mergers of ganking groups in HiSec. Now, again, it's hard to talk about this subject without being very specific about what relates to what. War decking isn't ganking in HiSec. Ganking in HiSec can still happen, but war decks are kind of affiliated with the groups that do some ganking like that. So there's some crossover. But anyway, so look out for that. We'll hit this next month, actually, when more of the changes come in and we can have a look at it. We need to give it time to kind of show what the patterns are going to be. A couple other things. CCP Rise, again, each one of these is a big topic. CCP Rise talks about Triglavian industry changes. What is that?
So the Triglavians, or the precursor technology, has been coming out since the Abyss, and there have been several stages of its of its release, right? So we had the initial stage where we got I think 3 Tech 1 ships, and we got introduced to the idea of the entropic disintegrator, which ramps up its damage. And then the second wave, we got a little bit filled in. We got the destroyer, that is a very snipery ship, and we got the battle cruiser, I think it was, which it has command bursts, and then we got the Tech 1 and Tech 2 Logi ship, which introduced like the healing version of the weapons. So now, as of the last Eve Gathering invasion tour event, I think it was in Amsterdam, they announced that there's going to be more Tech 2 Triglavian ships coming. So there's going to be a command destroyer, there's going to be a hack, so a heavy assault cruiser version of the Vedmak, and an assault frigate version of the Devamac. So they are basically fully fleshing out or starting to flesh out the Triglavian line. As part of that, they're also fleshing out the process by which Triglavian equipment is made and upgraded. So they're introducing an entire or a more fleshed out invention system. So there's now going to be data cores that are specific to Triglavian. I assume will drop in the Abyss, but may or may not. And there's also going to be, obviously more things to invent now that you're going to have those new ships. But also they have like tweaked some of the costs of things, particularly I think the Tech 2 guns, because some of the costs of Triglavian equipment right now is sort of insane. Another good example is they are changing the way the ammo is produced to make it so that more ammo is produced, because right now that's a really unusually expensive component of flying a Triglavian ship. And then the other really, really noteworthy thing is right now, if you want to build or if you want to have a lot of the basic Triglavian equipment, you have to get a blueprint. Whereas with faction stuff, it just drops. So it ends up that faction equipment becomes really, really valuable because it drops without having to be built. But then it's also like better in a lot of ways than even the stuff that does have to be built. So to counter all of that, they're now making it so that the faction equipment requires a Tech 2 piece of item in order to build it. So for those of you playing the home game, that means you need a Tech 1 disintegrator to build the Tech 2 disintegrator, and then the Tech 2 disintegrator to build the faction disintegrator.
Just like normal T2 production.
Well, I mean, they're not T2 faction because that isn't like, yes, sure, normal in that way.
We need to make it more basic. We need to think about this in more basic terms.
Right. Yeah. So it is very much more like a production of T2 equipment.
Okay. Because I think what they did before is they borrowed the Amarian line, right, to build the T2 production.
Yes. So in the lore, basically the Amarians have been one of the leaders in kind of reverse engineering the Triglavians. And so that's why any of the generic things are all Amarian. So like it uses Amarian sensor strengths. At the time, it used Amarian encryption methods or invention methods. But yeah, now that we're going to have multiple ships to invent, they are getting their own data cores and skills.
All right, let's try to do let's do something special here. Carneros, you want to introduce this next little?
Okay, this is fun. This is going to roll back a couple holidays to Christmas. There's a tradition in a lot of alliances that they do a Secret Santa gift exchange. And in a Secret Santa gift exchange, someone gave me an officer module and a Mutaplasmid. So just for fun, and since we're talking about Triglavians and stuff, we're just gonna, for fun, we're gonna roll the dice on camera and see if we get something cool. Ladies and gentlemen, go for it.
God help your soul.
For context, officer modules are very expensive to begin with, so it's a big risk.
And this is a bad idea.
So it's fun. It's camera. It's we're entertaining ourselves.
I love this. I got to do more of this. Can you explain what's happening? Slow down and let's explain what's happening.
Okay, we've got a Mizuro's modified ballistic control system. So this will enhance the damage of a missile-based system. And if this works out well, it will go on a Leviathan. And then, so we'll see. There are several factors that the mutagenic thing can improve or reduce in effectiveness. So there are three factors there. CPU usage, missile, I can't quite read it from here. But anyway, go for it.
Damage bonus.
Damage bonus and rate of fire bonus. So
Which
let's
is also
see
essentially a damage bonus.
If I'm bricking a nice, valuable unit. We'll see.
Well,
take your bets, people.
So of the three different kinds of mutaplasmids, he's using an unstable mutaplasmid, which is We're going to go with the strongest of the three.
The riskiest, maybe.
Yeah, by the way, can you tell us how much money we're putting at risk here? How much ISK? No?
I don't
All right.
know. Couple
Lots.
bill? I don't know.
Let's look at the market real quick.
Yeah, Unstable has, if I remember correctly, Unstable has the greatest rewards, but also the greatest like brickability. I can't watch.
Yeah,
You know
you
what's-
have to emotionally detach from it. It's television.
Yeah, I like that graphic too. It looks like an eyeball, and that's the pupil. All right, go ahead,
10
Carneros,
billion
whenever you're
ISK.
ready.
Holy shit, go for it.
Wait, how many? How much?
Well, I'm Market Tycoon is saying it's a 10 billion ISK wager here with the statistic probability of not winning. Okay.
Oh.
All right. So it's gonna, not that
Goodbye,
way, but
goodbye 10 billion module.
Oh, well, actually. Well, I mean,
this is
the
fun.
missile damage and the rate of fire
That was awesome.
cancel each other. So if I really, really need the CPU bonus and I want to spend 10 billion ISK, I could definitely use this. Oh,
Yes.
God.
So for those of you listening on the podcast who can't see what we just did, the CPU usage of this module, how much computer ability it requires on the ship, went down. So it's a little easier to fit. Actually, that's meaningless on a Titan. So whatever. Secondly, the missile damage bonus went down a lot. So yeah, never mind. It's not going to
So
do
that's
as much
that.
damage as before. And the rate of fire bonus went up. So it will fire the missiles a little bit faster, but they're not going to do as much damage. So it's interesting.
Mhm.
There might be a situation where a rare situation where it's worth using. It would be fun to carry it around inside the ship anyway, much like exotic dancers, even if it doesn't actually do anything.
Okay, real talk though. So because the rate of fire was increased by 11.9 and the damage was decreased by 11.2, you actually are seeing a slight overall DPS increase for a realistic CPU decrease on an officer module, which already has increased damage and probably reduced fittings. And it's a BC or ballistic controls, or what is it? One of the ballistic systems. So it's not just for a Titan. So this thing could make some frigate or cruiser incredibly ridiculous, and then when it drops,
think of that.
Funnier.
All right, I had always intended it in my head for my Leviathan, but hey.
Oh, I've been corrected that it wasn't 11%; it was 1 point or whatever. Yeah, no, the increase. Yeah,
it didn't look like equivalent, but I get where you're going, and that's the interesting thing about mutaplasmids is there's always weird combinations where the module can be useful. That was amazing, Carneros, for putting that up. Really, that was really cool to watch. For those of you that haven't seen what mutaplasmid, mutating of modules looks like, that's what it looks like, and it's kind of cool. It's a little bit of a gamble.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. It was more fun to do it on camera than by myself. Yeah,
you're right. I should probably, I'm going to follow suit and do that same thing because I think that's pretty neat. People can participate in the tension.
Yeah, I took about a month's worth of collecting up mutaplasmids, and I went and I did a thing on stream where I went through them all, and then we gave away the best one to a random person on the stream. It was pretty cool.
All right, thanks.
But while we're looking at things, though, that got announced as coming up, I want to draw your attention to a Twitter, a tweet from CCP Rise about ECM drones. Did you catch that by any chance? Let's roll back for a second to the last time ECM as a system got touched by CCP, which was not that long ago. Oh, thanks
November.
for bringing that up. In November, they changed it so targeted ECM, where you target someone and you do electronic countermeasures to them, that will break their ability to lock anything except you. If whoever targeted them with that and successfully ECM them is the only person that they can target back.
To clarify, The source of the ECM. That's what's important for the rest of this conversation.
The source of the ECM. In the case of a solo player flying around in low sec trying to protect himself with ECM, that now completely fails. In the case of a structure that's being attacked and you get in the gunner's seat and you try to use ECM to, for example, break the locks of the Triglavians so that they have to restart again and ramp up their damage, that doesn't work anymore. You can still do that if you fit burst ECM, but you can't do it with targeted ECM. It's a different animal. However, this change ended up sort of buffing, in some ways, ECM drones, because no one cares if they can now target the drones when they do ECM. So this nerf up here for the May release will reduce their jam duration from 20 seconds to 5 seconds, so that ECM drones, aren't as powerful anymore. Honestly, the whole ECM system probably still needs a lot of work. Ideally, it shouldn't be an absolutely useless module most of the time. The only things I could think of to do with a targeted ECM on a structure or on a ship is probably mess up the logi so that they can't rep people. That's about all you can really do. What can you think of?
Well, if there's a larger fight, then you can force targets to switch off of their primary target, as long as the primary is not the structure.
Yeah. Usually they're focused on small gangs lately, though.
True. So, well, I will say that, so my response to CCP Rise, which he liked, so I'm pretty sure this was intended. So that's a really short period of time, but it's long enough to warp off. One of the primary uses of ECM drones are things like a VNI or an explorer ship or anything like that, where you have a set of panic drones. And so if you get caught, you throw them out and you start jamming things and you just sit there and spam warp. So for that purpose, this basically doesn't change it at all. And depending on how you interpret what he said, it could possibly make them stronger, because usually the jam duration is the same as its cycle time. So if that means that it's actually cycling every 5 seconds, that's actually more opportunities to get that lucky jam off. Okay, I don't know if that's true though. Like if that's actually what's happening. Well, no. They're saying the cycle is every 20 seconds. So it cycles every 20 seconds, but then it only jams for 5. So even on the best of days with jamming drones, they will be not jammed for 15 seconds.
All right. Well, we'll check that out. It's interesting to see the CCP Rise is tweeting out balance pass stuff. We've seen some interesting thing come from him the other day. Said faction guns,
weapons basically will now be able to use T2 weapon ammo. Right now, there's kind of this discrepancy because a lot of really good guns, faction and officer guns, end up not being very useful because they can't use T2 ammo, and T2 ammo is one of the reasons why T2 weapons are so valuable. So as of the next patch, we will now be able to use T2 ammo in faction weapons, which is one of the reasons why the Triglavian change is also happening.
Yeah. These days, you kind of have to be listening to a lot of places where CCP might talk in order to hear everything that they say. Well, you have to watch the forums, you have to listen to Twitter, Reddit, everything, dev blogs.
Well, they're putting stuff out on the forums. I don't know if I think everything's coming out on the forums. It's official, which I kind of like, returning to there. Instead of trying to chase the players down to Reddit, I think going and saying, hey, we have this platform, we'll use it. You guys can quote from it. I think that's the better way for them to communicate with players. Kind of need to train us all to get back to reading forums, although the forums can be really terrible too. Anyway, let's move on then to, listen, an NPC guide came out from Sutonia, who's been on the show a bunch of times. He's also a CSM member and a really good solo PvPer, and he gives out some information on NPC rats. I recommend you look at that. We'll leave it in the show notes. And also a Black Omega security pilot named Mince Pants lost his Ragnarok in MTAC O. He was destroyed at a gate, it looks like. Some speculation on what he was trying to do, either trying to jump through the gate to then jump to, Sino jump somewhere else. Really don't know, but he was caught and killed there, I believe, by Snuff, but I'm not sure who actually took him out.
Those guys are mean.
Yeah, and from what I hear, Mince is like just somebody who's he's not careless or dumb, but he's just somebody who takes a lot of chances, plays high risk stuff. So didn't pay off that time. All right, so before we start talking about Fatal and the Rabbit and do our little Easter stuff, we have one more topic to hit, and that is an update on the Brisk Ball situation. Somebody want to describe it? I'm kind of talked out on this one.
Okay, there was a second article that went up, much like the first one, in the launcher of Eve. Hard not to notice something right there in the launcher, unless you're not actively playing Eve. And it's entitled, you can all see it, right? I don't even know I'm reading it to you. Interim statement on Brisk Revolve follow-up.
For audio
it's
audience.
Statement that they will make a statement.
Yeah, it basically said we're doing an investigation. We'll say something if we need to.
Right.
But,
so one of the biggest concerns during the whole Brisk Ball rollout thing was how transparent CCP was going to be. And the resounding theory was that CCP was not going to be transparent, that they weren't going to come out and tell anything. And so they gave out an update that basically spoke to that without saying anything.
Before you get there, let's finish what's actually there. Carneros, were you finished?
Well, let's look at that. It says, last week, we announced the permanent banning of Brisk Ball and the ejection from the Council of Stellar Management. We also issued 1-year bans to 2 other players involved in this incident and confiscated their associated in-game assets and ISK. I'm trying to add some drama to it.
Yeah, we'll put some music behind that.
I'm not trained this way. Anyway, following the statement, we had further discussions. They started an investigation. They're looking at the evidence again. And they feel like transparency and fairness and trust is of the utmost importance. So they're going to address this. They're going to communicate and see if they can clear up any lingering questions. And then, as should be expected, we will issue a full and frank apology for any mistakes for which we are responsible, as well as provide appropriate reparations to those affected by any erroneous actions we've taken. And then they gave us a place to discuss. Does that admit to a mistake? Not overtly.
Yeah, this is like, I'm starting to believe that CCP is literally trolling us. Because in the first one, they're like, we want to be fully transparent with you while holding all sorts of information back. Like, it just teases of information. This time they're like, if we find something, we will definitely freak out about it. And they're like, wait, does that imply that you did? Like, every single one of these announcements invite speculation on a level that I would think that CCP wouldn't want.
Well, unless you took their word for it, right? If you took their word for it, they're saying, they overspoke a little bit if you take their word for it. Like, if we assume that they did an investigation that was thorough and they found a paper trail that led to breaking of rules, and they eliminated the players that broke the rules to certain degrees, and we assume that it was all true and accurate, that statement overspoke a little bit. But it might have been because you have a CSM member, and that's why you needed to put the links together to say why 3 players got banned, not just 1 kicked from the CSM and then banned. So I think they might have overspoke a little bit, and in saying why there was a money transaction, the money got pulled back, etc. That might have been a bit too far, but I think they were trying to explain why these 3 things were connected and what the repercussions were for using the system to cheat.
Yeah, no, what I'm talking about is more like subtle psychology in the way that they presented it. So in both cases, they give details that they don't necessarily need to give that hints towards a deeper story, but doesn't actually like flesh out the details, right? Like for instance, in the original, we got all these weird clues, like the fact that it was the ISK and the assets were seized, and you know the detail about electronic devices in the meetings. You know, these details that don't actually tell us what's going on, but hint towards something that allows us to discuss stuff.
Yeah.
In this case, we get the details of what they will do if something ends up being a mistake, right? They will give a full and frank apology, and they'll give full reparations. Now, that's obvious, but the fact that they lay it out and not just like, and all mistakes will be corrected, or something more vague like that, the fact that they lay out the details makes it feel more like there's something there that may or may not exist.
I see what LB said in chat, but I actually don't think PR prepared this release. I think this was still written by the devs. And I don't know if IA still works like it did when I worked there, because CCP Arcanon's gone.
It is worth noting that the previous blog was put out specifically calling, by Dopamine by name. This one is not by a specific dev, and the follow-up post about it is created by CCP Falcon, which is a very standardized, more generic methodology when it comes to putting out these kinds of announcements.
Well, I think also the Eve player base is tricky to work with. I think that we like a lot of details, but we also want fairness. Those are the two things coming together here.
And there's a lot of armchair lawyers on top of all of that.
Yeah, sure. And people like to speculate. And again, I think I said this before, this is a really good topic where a lot of people are aware of it that play in this meta media environment. So we hear a lot about this, and everybody can have an opinion about it. You don't have to be an expert about the gameplay to know, if this smells funny or not. So I think that's why it has legs. But I actually think it's a very interesting problem that CCP's gotten themselves into. There's a lot of aspects to it that are unusual.
So one thing I want to, totally unrelated, I'm actually going to circle back on the Triglavian thing real quick, because going through the forums in order to look up stuff about this, I just found this dev post by CCP Rise. Dunk Dinkle actually asks, where will the component materials drop? Earlier I mentioned that we don't really know where the data cores drop. CCP Rise's response is, I can't say much about the sourcing at the moment since it's related to some new content. More info soon. So we have the new Triglavian structure that's being built. We have all this Triglavian lore that's rolling out, and we know that there's new Triglavian ships rolling out. So there's definitely this.
St. Petersburg coming up too.
Yeah. So we're getting kind of the outlines of basically an expansion level focus on the Triglavians, introducing new kinds of content and new rewards from that content.
Okay, so to finish up on the Brisk thing.
Sorry.
It's all right. It's all right. It's good. We needed that update. And we'll get to meetups that are coming up because, again, Eve is on world tour. So we'll talk about that in a second. I think the only thing we won't be able to talk about is the dang rabbit. But let's finish up with Brisk real quick. Yeah, so they've put out a statement that says, hold this space. We're going to have a statement this week. So after the show, anytime this week, that's we should expect to see, I think, a conclusion to this, right?
Of the Brisk situation?
Yeah.
I mean,
the Brisk, Pando, Darkshine situation.
Yes, likely within about a week or so, we will have some form of conclusion but I mean, I'm not going to make parallels to modern politics, man. I'm just going to leave it at that.
That is one of the things that is so amazing, that you have so many threads that from reality into the game. And I think it's never been exemplified more than what's happening now.
But on the other hand, I've been saying this for years. Like, this is not the first time that truth and fiction have merged in a very interesting way.
And because this has been now taken into the Eve metagame, whatever resolution we get in a week or two is not going to make everyone happy. There's not going to be any way they can remove the metagame effects of what they did. Let's just hope that they can restore confidence in the institutions involved.
Well, the CCP has damaged their reputation among players a few times, right? I mean, the last time I can remember that was significant was, and I hate to put it that way because I like CCP. We want them to do well, and we like all the people that work at CCP. But they, during the middle of a heavy conflict, which would have been World War B to most people, they basically gave the name Goon Swarm. What was it? They gave the alliance name of Goon Swarm to an enemy of Goon Swarm at the time, which was Darius.
Oh, yeah. Darius Johnson came back and he resurrected the original Goonwaff.
Yes. And they unlocked the name and handed it to him because he had a claim to it. That's what they said. And it was an incredibly bizarre miscalculation to do that in the middle of a heavy conflict. And it ended up not working out, and they had to reverse themselves anyway. But they survived that. They went beyond that. And I think they'll survive this if they have to reverse themselves. I think it's better to reverse themselves if they're not 100% sure, because you don't want to knock someone like Pando out of the game, or Darkshines, or Brisk for that matter, but especially Pando.
In retrospect, I don't think that error with the Goonfleet name actually meant it. I don't think it made any big difference. Not like, T20 or the boot INI mistake or a couple other things in the past. I think those had more sort of permanent scars associated. But we'll live past this too, and the scar will heal over.
Well, that's my point. I just think that if they want to stay out of the meta, which they do, and they didn't want to inject themselves on one side or the other, which it seems they did, people got over it, right? Like everybody went on after a while, and I think that'll happen here too.
Well, it's important to note that if they detected that something was wrong and they had the evidence that showed that action should be taken, the fact that they took action isn't a political action, isn't on one side or another. They did I assume that they did what they thought they should do. Right. And it wouldn't be the first time that they've acted upon a CSM member. And it wouldn't be the first time that they've acted upon a CSM member that had a strong affiliation with an important group involving accusations of supporting their group. So none of that is new. It's just the details of this made it far more reactionary than even previous events. So while I agree that CCP should have known that this was going to be a serious deal, the fact that it became like the defining serious deal of the moment, I don't know if that was necessarily preparable.
Yeah, well, we shall see. Next week we'll know. And it would be very interesting if, now I personally want to see this ban repealed because I like the guys from those three guys that I know. But it would be very interesting for them to say, head fake, they're still banned. And here's, even if they just say that these guys are still banned, what kind of resolution is that? That would be really, I think people would demand to see evidence, don't you think? The unredacted report.
I think that obviously there will be people that will demand the unredacted report. You brought it up, not me. But I don't think we're going to get that. I think at best what we're going to get is like basically a secondary assurance that all processes were done correctly. I don't think that this requires a public second opinion on the matter.
Yeah.
And as I've said before, that really a second response was completely unnecessary if it wasn't for the fact that they overshared in the first post. The things that they need to clarify isn't necessarily even like presenting their evidence. They really need to answer to the questions that they themselves brought up in their original questioning, right? If the CSM are the original cause of it, what other steps were taken, or at least were other steps, was a formal process done on top of it? How thorough was it in comparison to other times? And You know, if this accusation is going to ban somebody who's not accused of actually taking an action on the market, is not accused of actually leaking the information, i.e. that middleman, how do you come to a clean enough conclusion to ban him to the same degree as the person that actually took the action on the market? What's going on there? These questions would not have existed if they had not put those details in that blog, and therefore that's what they should answer to, in my opinion.
Last thoughts, Carneros?
I'm sick of discussing this.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll see. I mean, they're going to answer the question this week, so we'll see what happens. It's interesting. It's been interesting. The timing's been amazing for real life and Eve to mix. It's just fascinating to watch this. I hope it works out well. I personally want to see Pando back in the game, but we'll see. Okay. It's Easter. I don't know if everybody celebrates Easter, but it's Easter. What can I tell you? It's Easter Sunday. So we want to talk about the closest thing we have to Easter in EVE Online, and that is the Guristas. Ash,
Yes.
what do you know about them?
So the Guristas are one of the more recently established pirate organizations. I just discovered that they're less than 3 decades old. They're only 26 years old. They were started by a pair of ex-Caldari folk who are disenfranchised by their time in their service in the military, named Fatal and the Rabbit. And they got mostly famous for kidnapping a political official and ransoming him in a very public way. And that event basically kind of defined the Guristas as an organization. And so lots and lots and lots of pirates flocked to their banner of the Skull Bunny. And the Guristas kind of got this reputation of being a pirate's pirate, very Pirates of the Caribbean-esque, where they're definitely out for money. They're definitely, doing piracy things, but there's a certain amount of outlandishness to the way that they do things. They're very, the crazier the heist, the better. These are bank heisty kind of guys. Most famously, there was the Creel project, in which the state was working on cloaking technology, and the Guristas stole it. And in the process, Fatal was killed by enemy, or by a player, kind of by an accident of the live event, but they rolled with it. And so Fatal disappeared, and the Guristas have just kind of been a thorn in the state's side for a while. There is some assumption that the Galente are either at least friendly with, or possibly even supporting the Guristas as a nuisance against the state. And most recently, the Guristas have been famous because Fatal has returned as the guy who basically created the Valkyrie project. He, through the process of coming back, learned a lot more about cloning technology and learned how to hijack individual pilots' mind, that like not necessarily through the normal process of cloning, but just like a normal baseliner pilot. If he finds a good pilot, he can effectively kidnap their brain at them when they capture them, and turn them into a Valkyrie pilot. And so that's where that whole story came from. We haven't heard that much about that since the carrier kidnapping, and since then the Serpentis have been much more in the limelight. But last year we did get a Guristas bunny, an Easter event involving the Guristas, the hunt, in which we found egg-like capsules. This year, I'm assuming we're not getting one.
Pods.
That's my breezing through the Guristas organization.
So Fatal and the Rabbit. It's a chronicle. You can read it. There's also some information on them in the source book that's sold by CCP if you want to know the backstory of EVE Online, which we strongly recommend. It's good stuff there.
Yeah, the source is one of, 2 or 3 books that are really good at letting you know about EVE. There's EVE Source, and the Frigates of EVE book is also incredible when it comes to like just world building. CCP Falcon wrote, I believe, both of them.
Really? CCP Falcon wrote the lore book? I know he worked on it.
I know he did Frigates of Eve. I think he did Source too. I can double check.
Do we also have a cool video we want to show at this point?
We might. I think our engineer McLeod is checking to see if it can be run. It's not that easy to run videos because you have sound issues and stuff like that. So sometimes we can, sometimes we can't. We'll find out in a second. And if we can, then we'll have Ash set it up. But there is, we don't have the video available. But Ash, where can we see that video? Where can a person find the video?
So unfortunately, this is not one of those videos that you can just go to an individual YouTube because they never published the real video by itself. But back in, I believe it's 2015 Vegas, right? They were revealing Valkyrie at that point, at least the details of it. And it was during the time in which they were revealing the villain of Valkyrie. And so basically what it is the reveal trailer that Fatal is back and is going to be the principal villain of Valkyrie.
Yeah, and that was a big shock because they hadn't alluded to that at all, and everybody thought he was dead, right? Okay, we can show it. So let's run that video when you get a chance. In the meantime,
he has to set it up because he can't start it at the beginning. He has to start it at the right moment.
It's at exactly 22 minutes into the video.
So they cut this out and put it on YouTube because it would be so easy to do that.
I've asked several times and it didn't ever come out.
All right, Ash, go ahead and you already introduced it, so let's see the video.
There are two sides to every story. Now you can hear mine. You say I killed you, but you were already dead when I found you, chose you. A great pilot, yes, but without purpose. Lost. A leaf on the wind. A walking shadow. You were going to die anyway. If not in that battle, then the next. I saved you from a fate worse than death. I saved you from a wasted life. I made you better, faster, stronger. I made you immortal. And how do you repay this gift? With betrayal. I know you think nothing can touch you, that you are beyond death. But let me assure you, I am and will always be fatal.
Wow.
Nice.
So yeah,
I forgot how little they showed in that video. I thought it was a full, I guess at the very end there.
no, it was very teasy. Like, especially since with how vague it was, it even took a little bit for everybody to fully process what was happening. Because there were some people that didn't know who Fatal was. So that pun at the very end takes a little bit of understanding itself. It is unfortunate, obviously, that Valkyrie has kind of petered out. It'll be interesting to see whether or not they continue to progress that story, because it ties very much in with the Drifters. And there's another interesting character known as the Quartermaster that we got out of that storyline. And they're all kind of connected. And it's obvious that, like, so where back in the day, Fatal and the Rabbit were sort of jovial. They were raging against the system. So we're almost like Joker-like in their chaos nature. There's something about death and resurrection that has changed Fatal. He is far more focused, and as I said, this has greatly expanded his knowledge of the cloning process, which of course is very connected to drifters and all that other stuff too. So this probably won't be the last we see of that thread. It'll just be interesting how they bring it back, given the fact that Valkyrie did not succeed as well as they would like.
You think they'll bring it back into EVE Online?
Well, so the quartermaster, right? So we actually had an event in which the quartermaster sent us on to get trinary data relics, and those trinary data relics have been basically the gift that keeps on giving when it comes to like revealing plot points. If you think about it, actually, that was the first time that we ever had the word tri, as in triangle, as in Triglavians, really exposed to our vernacular. So all of this is kind of totally connected. And really, the only challenge is figuring out how that plot has kind of evolved over time based on the ongoing business decisions at the same time. Like how early was the Triglavians really conceptualized versus going as a drifter plot and stuff like that. But we know that it is a piece in play, we'll put it that way. Last time we heard, the quartermaster had basically commissioned a Stargate to be realigned to find an old Thucker establishment in order to find a star map that led him to a drifter hive. So that's where we are left off, was he found that, and we're not 100% sure how much the quartermaster is working with or against Fatal, but we know that Fatal has basically grown out from his time with the Guristas, and now is using kind of the fact that everybody thinks he's dead as cover to become a major player in this shadow war that we've been having unfold since Rubicon.
Wow, since Rubicon expansion.
I love
well,
the
yeah,
connection.
that's when Caroline Star occurred, and all of the very first like inklings of all of this started with the Rubicon expansion.
Caroline Star, being a star that was discovered by an EVE player, said, hey, that part of the sky looks a little bit brighter than usual, and it started to grow and grow, and so they named it after that pilot.
Caroline Grace, that's correct. Yeah, so Rubicon was the expansion. We got ghost sites, right?
Yeah.
And
I so wanted to do ghost sites. Are they still a thing?
They are absolutely still a thing. They never got around, like they said that they were going to introduce more things to it. I don't think they ever did, but it is, I believe, still the place to get Ascapalian implants, the warp speed implants, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I just thought I thought that was some really clever and new, interesting kind of solo gameplay, something to do while you're waiting around. And I think Abyssal Space just really was an amazing addition to that kind of gameplay. You're waiting around for a fleet to start. You got 15 minutes. Why don't you do this thing? I think that's great. The one thing I have to say is the lore. It went from very familiar settings, right? Where you have corporations in charge, you have war between empires. Like this is all very familiar and historic. And then it got into the drifters and a lot of tinfoiling about what actually was real and what wasn't real and what was, it was great for you guys that like lore. But I often feel that's where I got off the bus. I was like, I don't understand all the stuff that I can't pronounce, and I can't really figure out if something happened or didn't happen, or and it's just too hard. So I like the Fatal and the Rabbit, gangsters or military espionage, whatever. I like that kind of stuff that I can grab onto much more easily, and I hope CCP is learning from, say, past mistakes. I consider it a mistake with the Triglavians because they're so out front about what's happening with the Triglavians. It's a lot less mysterious than the drifters were, for instance.
Oh, I see. Yeah, they definitely are doing a better job of making sure like the baseline understanding of what's going on is more public nowadays, right? Like the drifters, if you didn't look into it, they were just this confusing thing that you didn't understand and did weird stuff in the game. You're absolutely correct. With the Triglavians, you have things like the fact that they took over all the billboards, and so it's really, really hard to avoid them telling you exactly who they are. It's moments like those that you're right. It makes me feel that the Triglavians are particularly important to the future of the next few steps because to me, it feels almost like, like right before the finale of a season, they'll have that episode where all it is kind of going back and calling back to all the important moments of the story to make sure everyone's on the same page right before the important thing happens. I feel like we're getting some sort of version of that at the moment.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for bringing us back to Fatal and the Rabbit on this Easter Sunday. Do we have any other news? I think we're done.
I think we might be done. The next Eve event, I think, is St. Petersburg, is Eve Russia. Am I right?
Yes.
And, let's cross our fingers that we get some cool new information at that, like we did at Amsterdam.
Signs point to yes.
That's Eve Russia. Then there's Eve Down Under. And I think Hilmar himself will be down there, the CEO of CCP. And then you also have, after that, something that's not on the world tour, but something we recommend is the retreat that's happening on I believe the 28th. And that is from Cascora, who's part of Talking in Stations. And that's in St. Louis area. So if you're interested in that, go to talkinginstations.com. You'll see a world tour tab and check it out. Also, Eve North is going to happen relatively soon. And I talked to the organizer of that. Her name is Ivy. She's from, is it Sixth Empire? What is the Space Pope's?
Sixth Empire.
It is Sixth Empire. Okay. Yes, she's with Space Pope. She's also an RPer. She's a 6-foot redhead. You can't miss her. And she's the one throwing Eve. I call it Eve Toronto, but it's Eve North. So if you guys want to check that out, you should. It looks like it happens in a beautiful, beautiful hotel with beautiful views of the city. It's got a gorgeous skyline, and it's just going to be, that is going to be a nice event. Whether it's crazy and whatever, I don't know. Dirk McGurk will be there, so probably will be. But it is a beautiful setting for a convention. Should be cool. That's Eve North. Well, I think we're done, but it's a misnomer because Eve is always going. So there will be stuff happening all week. You can catch up with us when we do a chill stream Tuesday, Thursdays, 1600. And we hang out, we look at the market, we talk about what's going on Eve. If something comes up, we'll break to live coverage. Stay with Talking in Stations to get your news. One last thing. Want to go back to the beginning and make sure that you know that we had a sponsor for this show, and it was Eve. That is Eve Mogul, and that is eve-mogul.com. And check out what services they have for you. It's industrial based, and they are really good. I use them myself. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Carneros.
Thank you,
Ash.
Thank you.
We'll let you guys get on with your weekend plans, your holiday plans. And I want to thank everybody for showing up today and watching the live podcast. And of course, thanks Carneros, our engineer, who has to scramble and keep up with us.
McLeod.
McLeod is the engineer.
Oh, did I call Carneros the engineer?
Yeah.
Oops.
Carneros, thank you for doing everything for us. We would do nothing without him.
He's engineering with his toes below the tiki hut there. Sorry, McLeod, our engineer, who's a big part of the show and helps with the planning and stuff like that. All right, guys, thanks for showing up. That's all we've got time for this week. We will see you on the next Talking in Stations.